Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to KSR's rapid reaction of Kentucky's 71-59 loss at Mississippi State. You know, this is a game that really, honestly, to me, kind of out from the jump, like even the very beginning of the game, it just felt like Kentucky just didn't have it today. It just felt like Kentucky, for whatever reason, just wasn't fully there. And I really hate to start these loss rapid reactions off thinking about, what does this mean for the end of the year? Like we have to blow everything up. But I think today's losses at Mississippi State, to me, there was one really glaring problem. And this is the part that I want to start with, and really hammer on. I think Kenny Brooks kind of set himself up for this in the offseason, right? I think Kenny Brooks did this to himself in part, where you look at the bench, or not even the bench, just entirely. You look at the rotation today. Tiani Key is out, right? That's important context to know. She's a starter. That really sucks, right? But you look at the bench, okay? And again, like I was saying, it's not even just the bench. You just look at the whole team. Kentucky starters today played 37 minutes, and that was Jordan Obi. She actually fouled out, so she probably would have played more. So 37 minutes for Jordan Obi, 36 for Tony Morgan, 38 for Asia Boone, 39 for Clara Strack, 39 for Amelia Hassett. Lexi Blue, Kaylin Carroll, and Josie Gilvin combined for 11 minutes and 0 points. And post-game, Kenny Brooks was kind of asked about the bench and what he really needed to see. And it was simple as, well, they got to be better. When he was on the radio with Darren Hedrick, he said, we're not as deep as we want to be, and some of our kids got to be superhero-ish. And I got to be honest, this is the first time I found myself all season really saying, well, Kenny, a lot of that's on you. Where, you're in the off-season. I think Asia Boone, A-plus bench piece, right? I know she's starting right now, but, she's been a great sixth man. Lexi Blue's a top 40 recruit, and I love her to death. And I don't mean anything I'm about to say, right? Anything I'm saying. I do not mean in a disrespectful way. I am just evaluating the basketball I'm watching. Lexi Blue's a top 40 recruit, and she can't play. I don't know if she's a liability on defense, but she can't play defense well right now. Kaylin Carroll, kind of the same boat. And Josie Gilvin's just not getting playing time at all, really. And it's frustrating because that's a top 40 recruit, a top 15 recruit, and Kaylin Carroll. And Josie Gilvin, while she wasn't a super highly ranked recruit, okay, she's a senior transfer who had a breakout year last year at Western Kentucky. And I think on really most rosters across the country could give you really valuable PT. And she's just not doing that here. So there's two problems, right? I sit and think about, okay, first of all, when you're, in the offseason and you're doing this transfer portal recruiting, you're doing this speed dating, as Kenny Brooks calls it, is it just a poor evaluation of talent? Or even, let's say even with Lexi and Kaylin, is it, let me say this. I think Kaylin has a lot of potential ahead of her, right? I think she's going to be really good. But you look at the bench, right? Let's just talk about them generally. Where you say, was it a poor evaluation of talent? I don't even think that's the case. I think Lexi, KK, and Josie can be good players. Okay, so question number one, is it just a poor evaluation of talent and they're just not that good? I don't even think that's the case. Okay, so then it becomes, what are they doing in practice? It becomes, what are you doing to make sure they're ready for the games? First of all, listen, coaches, people talk about this all the time. You cannot, you can try your hardest and you can do some things to kind of make it seem like it. But the reality is you cannot simulate game reps in practice. Okay? So when Lexi Blue is playing 7 minutes, Kaylin Carroll's playing 2, Josie Gilvin's playing 2, they're not getting the game reps to get better, right? And even in non-conference play, I mean, there's a game here and there where they play the fourth quarter, and that's great. But they haven't been tested, right? And for Josie, I mean, she's a senior, right? But the SEC is different. And as I think Kenny Brooks has noted in the past, she has to learn to play within the system. Well, how can Josie Gilvin learn to play within the system if she's not playing, right? And I'm not sitting here saying, start the Kentucky kid, play the Kentucky kid 40 minutes a game. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm doing this for, right? But when you lose someone like Tiani Key, and you greatly miss her, I think that was very evident today, you have to sit there and say, okay, who can I go to? And you're asking that starting five to play 36-plus minutes a game every single game. And, it gets so bad now where I don't know how tuned in you all are for, like, his radio, Kenny's radio, and all the press conferences. But Kenny will drop every now and then that, like, dude, the starters don't, like, I say they don't practice. Like, they get, like, extra rest because of how much they're playing in these games. And, I hate to think about this, but I think it's a fair point of thought at the very least where, Liz Kitley at Virginia Tech, she plays, 35 minutes a game at Virginia Tech, and she tears her ACL at the end of the season. You're thinking, oh, that really sucks. Okay. And then Georgia Amore, this past season, plays, these kinds of minutes all season long. And right after she gets drafted, tears her ACL. And now Tiani Key's injury, that's a freak accident, right? Like, we all saw that. That's a freak accident. That's an outlier in this situation. Like, what are we going to do if we get even later in the season? And I don't want to speak anything to existence, but name anybody from that starting five. What if they tear something? What if they get hurt? Right? Like, there gets to a point to where, like, when I was thinking about what am I going to say when I come on here, I was going to make a big point of Kentucky just didn't play with energy today. And I don't think they did. But at the same time, how much energy do they have to give right now? And it's really unfortunate because when you're missing shots like Kentucky did today, where you got good looks, just couldn't make shots, right? Like a lot of those shots were even falling short, right? That's one clear sign of fatigue. And you're just sitting there wondering to yourself, what is going on? Where, again, Lexi Blue, Kaylin Carroll, Josie Gilvin, 11 combined minutes. And you're sitting there thinking to yourself, okay, the bench can't contribute, but how much of that comes back to Kenny? Where it's, I think about practice where we've all seen the clips and heard the stories, right? Where they'll spend, they'll pour so much resources, so much time and energy and coaching and development into a Tony Morgan, a Georgia Amore, a Clara Strack, a Tiani Key, even, right? But like I remember going into practice one time, and I was literally like 6-on-1 against Tony Morgan, and that's great. She's become probably the best point guard in the country, just statistically speaking. That's great. That's awesome, right? No one's mad about that. But what are you doing? Are you giving that same attention, that same focus to Alexi Blue, a Kaylin Carroll, or a Josie Gilvin? Are you pouring that same amount of time and, again, those resources? Like, are you putting that much into their development too? Into making sure that someone like a Josie Gilvin is comfortable and fit in your system? Or is it just a matter of, okay, well, if you stick, you stick, and if you don't, you don't, right? You find your way into the rotation, and you're either going to play or you're just not, based on how you do. I'm all for playing your best players, right? And, like, that's duh, right? Like, the starting five should be the starting five, and honestly, they should be playing 30 minutes a game. But I think back to non-conference play, and I just sit and say to myself, well, could we have gotten Lexi, KK, Josie some more run to where, you're down Tiani Key and you can't make shots? Okay, well, next train of thought is, okay, let's go down the bench and see what we can do. You know, and I get, it's like Kenny said in the post-game press conference, it comes down to the little things like rebounding and defending. I would argue you need playing time to be able to do those things well, right? You can't just get thrown into the fire and be expected to done well in the SEC. But, you know, ideally you would be able to go to them and say, all right, make a shot, right? And I get it. Like, they went, like, Lexi Blue was 0 for 2, KK was 0 for 1, right? But I just sat here, think to myself, like, are players 7 through 9 in the rotation getting the same opportunity to thrive as players 1 through 5, right? You know, I don't want to sit here because Virginia Tech fans will, you know, I don't even want to get started on the train of favoritism or anything like that. But what I do want to ask, and what I think is fair to ponder, is, well, what's going on in practice to where, you know, these three just can't play at all, right? I don't think Kenny and the staff did a super bad job of evaluating talent, right? I think Lexi, KK, and Josie can bring some value. But what is going on to where they're not being developed enough to where they can contribute in a game like this? And you could argue, like, you're up 38-32, should just close out the game, right? But, you know, like I've been saying, there gets to a point to where Jordan, Tony, Asia, Claire, and Amelia are just damn tired. Just out of energy, tapped out, right? Gas tank on empty. And I just, again, wonder, like, how much of that comes back on Kenny Brooks and the staff. You know, is it as simple as not hitting shots, right? Is it as simple as, Kentucky goes 23 of 72, 5 of 29 from 3, right? Obviously, you'd say, well, Kentucky just needs to hit shots, and they got open looks. But how much of the, fatigue, how much of the lack of production from the bench, from Lexi, KK, and Josie, how much do those things come back on the staff? And I think that's worth pondering. You know, it's a question I think people have thought to themselves about Kenny Brooks for a while, right? Where he's going to have a star or two, but outside of that, what does he actually have? And I think it's just a valid question. I don't think the season's over. You know, I think this truly, playing on the road in the SEC is tough, right? Kentucky lost this game by, 12, right? 59-71, I think that's 12. Yeah. Like, listen, at the end of the day, you can just not have your A game on. And that's very well what happened and probably even did happen here. But I think when you sit and look about this team's true potential and, like, can we make an Elite Eight or Final Four? Can we do this and that? I think there are questions that you have about how good Kentucky really is or how good Kentucky really can be. And I think those questions just ultimately come back on Kenny and the staff. And I don't think that's disrespectful. I don't think that's, pushing a negative agenda, anything like that. I think that's a fair, honest question and a halfway criticism. So I'm Phoenix Stevens, again, with KSR's rapid reaction of Kentucky's 71-59 loss to Mississippi State. Kentucky, and it's like Kenny said, Kentucky's 17-3. That's not bad. A lot of people probably thought you'd be 17-3 or maybe even a little bit worse at this point, right? You're still in a good spot. 4-2 in the SEC is not a bad place to be in right now. You beat Tennessee on Thursday on the road, really tough game against a better team. That's a rivalry game, so hopefully Kentucky can kind of get the juices flowing for that one. But, if you can win that game, hey, you're back on track, right? It's all about trying to find momentum and keeping it in the SEC. So I'm going to get out of here. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this KSR Rapid Reaction. If you have enjoyed, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know, is this a Kenny Brooks issue? Is it really as simple as, well, hey, Phoenix, shots didn't fall today, man. It happens. What do you think happened today? What do you think went wrong? Where does Kentucky go from here? like I said, thank you all so much for tuning in. I'll see you all next time. Peace out. Go Cats.